should have tuned this before I played it.
I love it. Nice intro.
Maple syrup. Hey, okay, I'm gonna put this down before I hurt somebody with it. But it's the Maple Syrup Show, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome especially to our guests tonight, Katie and Jeremiah from the Creative Fold.
Thank
As you
you.
can see, I am the only one here tonight. Alara is busy with children, and Erica, I don't know what Erica's doing, but she deserves time off too, so she's off doing something. But we have with us tonight two guests to make up for the loss of Erica and Alara, right? Like, I mean, obviously our guests are more important, and they make up for more than that. And it's wonderful to have you, Jeremiah and Katie. Can you introduce yourselves? Starting with Katie, tell us who you are, what you do, and why you're here.
Sure. I started the Creative Fold, and we develop toys and games. We develop all kinds of consumer products, but especially toys and games. And I got into the toy industry. Well, when I was little, my family was big game players in general. So I kind of have always been interested in it. We played a lot of card games and board games. And I think a lot of people say that's like your start usually. But when I was in college, I went to school in New York City, and I got into games there. And I think we can talk more about origin stories next. But so we just started the Creative Fold. And Jeremiah, why don't you go?
I'm Jeremiah, and I got into this not so much from the toy and game route. It's more because of the skills I have. So I'm an industrial designer, product designer, and I sketch out products and do the CAD work, and also trying to make physical products very user-friendly and stand out to the right crowd. So I was recruited by Katie and Jody, who is the other owner of the company, and they brought me in, and they have taught me a lot about specifically toy and game, and I've brought these skills into this industry through their help, and learning all the time, especially manufacturing things from Jody too. So yeah.
Did they just like see you playing the drums somewhere? I just saw your picture on the website as you playing the drums.
Oh yeah. You asked for a picture for this to promote the podcast. I was like, I can't do the same drumming one because
that one's all played out. It's been seen. I gotta use a new one. Very cool, very cool. So all of you out there in Maple Syrup Land, I for some reason can't see the chat. Don't know what's happening. We'll figure it out. And there's been a couple blips in the number of bars that we have in the transmission. So if we fade out, we will come back. If we go kind of robotic, nothing's happened. We haven't been taken over by aliens. We're just experiencing some lag. But do put your quotes up there, your questions up there in the chat. Hopefully we'll get to them. And we should be able to see them eventually. Sometimes this happens. All right, so let's actually go to the origin story questions. And I know, Katie, you love this question.
Yeah, I started to dive into it a little bit.
Yeah, it's okay. What kind of games do you love?
Well, I love games that are a good balance between luck and strategy. So that's kind of a big place. I know it's not everybody. Some people really like super logic-y games that are just strictly logic, and then some people like really pure luck-based games. But I like ones that are a good blend of the two. So that's kind of my favorite. I could name a couple, but
sure, yeah, go ahead, name a couple.
Like, now I'm gonna blank. Like Settlers. If you just start with the basic one, like Settlers of Catan or something, where you have, some basic game mechanic or anytime you have something that is a randomizer, like a dice or a card shuffle or something like that, then you get some level of randomization. And as opposed to something like war, where you are it's completely random and you have no idea what's going to come up next. So,
Right.
But I prefer ones that have a little bit of strategy and then a little bit of luck. There's a card game called Parade that I really like. That is, if you ever played that is the randomization of the shuffle is the luck based, but then you also have the strategy of what you play, and so that's another good one.
And what about you, Jeremiah? You said that you didn't really come from toy and game, but did you play a lot of games as a kid? Or now that you're playing more games as I'm assuming a grown up. I don't know if you're grown up. Who knows? Is this like, yeah, I've found where I should be. I've always loved games, or is this really a newfound hobby of yours? What do you think?
It's more newfound actually, and I'm probably playing games more often now than I have at any other point in my life. So, but it's really great, and it's awesome to get in and be playtesting games and doing that for a purpose. Sometimes to make the games work better for others, and then also playing games for fun. Katie will just have me over to her house sometimes, and we'll play games, and like my sister, her husband, and I've been playing games a lot with my fiance and her family, and it's just kind of this job has kind of cultivated me to have more of a fascination with games and play more board games in general. So
that's kind of neat that you didn't come from games, but you found them anyway. It's like it was meant to be. It's a match made in heaven. So let's talk about both of you, your pre-game kind of work skills. And so, Katie, you said you went to school in New York City, and you're a graphic designer by trade, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I started the school I went to was School of Visual Arts, and so my real training is in graphic design.
Okay.
But when I was in school, for my senior portfolio, I just chose to make a board game.
Oh, did you? That's so fun.
Yeah, so and I still have it. It's just collecting dust on the shelves, but maybe someday it'll get pulled out. But as we'll talk about, it's not a great one for manufacturing and that's why it's been sitting there, because it's just really hard to manufacture.
Because it was a passion project that like blew up into something
bigger.
Yeah,
and I made all the pieces by hand. So what I didn't know at the time was how hard it would be to manufacture in mass production. So it's why I haven't really
we're definitely going to talk about today.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of the
idea. Just because it's easy to prototype doesn't mean that it can be mass produced.
Interesting.
Or mass produced easily. Yeah.
Right.
But I got made that board game, and then someone, a friend now, hired me into a magic toy company. So that was my start in the toy industry, was working for a Phantasma Magic in New York, and the toy building in New York City, the old toy building. I don't think it still is anymore.
And so what type of products did you make for that company?
They made magic, I'll call them magic toys. They're magic products like props like cup and balls, or magic wands, or card decks, but that were largely marketed to kids. So adults too, they have. I think Phantasma is still around. They're company that's been around for a long time, even before I had been in the industry.
Right. So they might have marketed or made some pro level things or adult level things, but a lot of it was mostly for kids. Like those boxes of 25 magic tricks.
Exactly that. Yeah. And they sold big into mass. So that was my introduction into mass retail, was making. I was a graphic designer for them, the senior graphic designer. So I did the packaging at the time, and like whatever else we needed for the product. But so that was the first introduction to, I think they sold into like BJ's and Cracker Barrel, and I can't remember, but big name retailers like that.
Right. And Jeremiah, you are an industrial designer, correct?
Right. Yep.
And what's the difference? What, like, for those of us who might not be as educated in, the terminology, what's the difference between, say, a graphic designer and an industrial designer or a product designer? Is there a difference, and what is it?
Generally, there is. Yeah. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Jeremiah.
Yeah, graphic designers usually work in 2D, and an industrial designer works in 3D objects and designing for the whole way around. That's the biggest, simplest difference between graphic and industrial design. And
Industrial design tends to get into like engineering a little bit. Not, you don't have to be an engineer, but you start to get into that realm. And a graphic designer is going to generally get more into like typography and like,
printing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, like, when you said earlier, Jeremiah, that you were learning more about the manufacturing processes, is that because of the role of the industrial designer leads you to have to learn about that kind of stuff?
It does, and you can take it in different routes. So I've worked at a couple of companies where the standard route there is taking it more in a sketching out the image and what this will look like, and very, very visual and focus on the emotional side of the product. And I've kept that, but have also worked further and further through my career toward the manufacturing side as well. So I did some of my own entrepreneurial projects where I had to source things and look into that, and have worked further and further toward that in my time at Creative Fold.
That's so neat. Yeah. And they are different, like, programs at colleges or universities. They'd be totally separate faculties and schools, or
usually
related. Yeah.
Some interrelated. It depends on the school, but some schools might have like the same foundation year sometimes. But then, which is, in a lot of especially art trade schools, you'll have a foundation year that has a bunch of different majors together, and then they split off. So I actually started in illustration, and it had happened to luckily have the same foundation year as graphic design. It was the very first year I was like, not for me, and very quickly switched. And the illustration side, it was no. I like to push a button and have all my tools go away and there's no mess.
That's kind of like me. My sister, she's a doctor, and she one day called home, and I said, "Oh, how come you sound so tired?" She's like, "Oh, I had to sleep in the hospital last night." I said, "Oh, that's it. I can't be a doctor. I can't do that." So I became a therapist instead. Like, I can't do what you do because I don't want to sleep in a hospital overnight. That's just unnatural. And then, so in industrial design, I have a friend who went to school for, like, I think he's a package designer. Like, is that a separate thing?
It is, yeah. There was a program. The school I went to had a whole program for that also. And
so neat.
Yeah, I started as a mechanical engineer.
Okay. So you switched to
at a different school, and then I switched to industrial design, and I don't think they had packaging design or industrial design at Penn State is where I started my college education. But at RIT, where I was, they had all three: mechanical, package design, industrial design, and people said the people who found out that mechanical engineering wasn't for them either go to packaging or industrial design. And it's just,
interesting.
Yeah.
I can see that, right? I can see, like, I'm interested in a lot of the same things, but I don't necessarily want to do these other things. I just want this small part of it. And it's actually nice that, you have options, because a lot of people think, and this is actually very true about education in general. Like, a lot of people like, got to go to university, colleges, community college or whatever, trade school, not good. But it's actually okay. It's totally fine. Education is education, right?
That's actually what my mom said, was if you want to be an artist, my only requirement is you specifically go to an art trade school, so you learn it as a trade, as opposed to, taking a few classes in it at a liberal arts school or something.
Right.
Go and
learn
do
the
it.
History and
dive into it fully. And
I think that's a really smart way to look at it, Mom. Your mom's smart.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
glad
look
she
at it as
did.
a trade, look at it as something where you're gonna learn, like, the business end of it. I have a friend who's a sign painter. He was, like, I think he's one of the last, like, hand sign painters in, like, at least the province of Ontario, if not, like, the entire country of Canada. Because people don't make signs by hand anymore, right?
Yeah.
They just, like, letter set it or whatever, and so he's, like, the only one who can hand paint letters the way that they did it in the 50s. And so he
Mm,
gets called for all these weird things, like, he does a lot of props for movies,
right.
because there's a big film industry in Toronto.
That's super cool.
And, so he's the one that does all, like, if you have, like, a 50s diner set, he's the one that's gonna paint your menu on, like, a billboard or whatever, because he's the only one who can hand paint like that,
Hmm.
in that style, at least that they can find, I guess, I don't know. And it's a totally dying art. And so it's really interesting to hear about, where people get their education from and how they find their way into this particular industry.
Mhm.
So now that we know where you came from and we know who you are, Jeremiah and Katie, graphic designer, industrial designer, what is the Creative Fold and how does that all link to you and to gaming? What does the Creative Fold do? And you're the COO, correct, Katie?
Yeah, yeah. And
What does that mean? What do those letters mean?
the chief operating officer. So,
Okay.
and I like operations. So when I say I started in graphic design, but what I found out that I like about graphic design is organizing things. And it kind
Right.
of doesn't really matter to me. It doesn't have to be, I like organizing type on a page, but I also really like spreadsheets, which is not always that common in designers. I like designing a good spreadsheet. So
It's very common in game designers to like a good spreadsheet.
yeah, that's true actually.
We like spreadsheets a lot.
But as far as the Creative Fold, where we call ourselves a creative problem solving agency. So we're not like a typical design house because
Mhm.
we do have, while we do have graphic design and industrial design, we look at it as a whole problem, whatever our
Right.
clients come to us with, and try to execute on whatever they bring their secret sauce, and then we help them with the execution part. And so we think of ourselves as tackling, because as you said on our website, you can see we do
Mhm.
a little bit of a lot of different things. We've done everything from a physical, like small plastic toy with injection molding and plastic, all the way to running conferences. So we have a really broad range, and what ties it all together is problem solving and project management. But I think tackling complex problems. So
Right.
and,
That
and bringing multiple
require
resources.
the specific skills that your team has, in terms of design and production and
Yeah.
to solve that problem. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. So, viewers, if you go to thecreativefold.com, you'll find a list, like a page of all of some sample products that they've had a hand in. Whether it's specifically Katie and Jeremiah, I don't know, but the Creative Fold in general.
Some of both.
And
Some of us, we've touched many of the things on that
yeah,
page.
yeah,
But
yeah. And it's great because they list it out in a very specific way. It's like, what was the problem when it came to us? What did we do? What was the solution? And so it really gives you a good case study analysis of what the Creative Fold could do perhaps for you. And so one of the audience categories for this show is definitely like small publishers and definitely big publishers as well, like Asmodee Studios will watch this later. Um, but the idea of having a place where you can go to solve some of your problems, this is one of those places. So, what types of problems do you find yourself getting most involved with in terms of games?
well, so we do find ourselves largely working with toy and game companies. Like I was saying, we could work and have worked for other types of consumer products and other things, like I said, like conferences, but that's a much smaller part of what we work with. Because our background comes from toy and game, that's
Mhm.
where a lot of our clients come from. I'd say probably some of the biggest or most common things we come across is helping people figure out how to take an idea from either a barn napkin sketch or a little bit further along, like a rough prototype, to an actual manufacturable, mass production manufacturable product. And that can involve a lot of steps. A lot of times that can involve helping to figure out sourcing the actual components, play testing the games, and helping to figure out how to make it appeal to a broader audience, that kind of thing, especially, and a cost is a big part of it. So you're trying to make sure that the components that your prototype starts out as is something that can actually be turned into a mass production thing.
Mm-hmm. And so in terms of toy and game, what kind of companies are usually hiring the Creative Fold? Is it more mass-centered companies like that are putting
it's a
into
mix.
larger?
It's a mix. I would say, well, everywhere from entrepreneurs who get kickstarted and are funded and then are now left with, oh, great, now how do we produce this?
Right.
to more, upper mid-size companies that, so like Think Fun and Ravensburger and What Do You Meme, and we've worked with Buffalo Games and Exploding Kittens. So some kind of like of the larger kind of mass scale companies. Mm-hmm. And then there a lot of times with those kind of companies, rather than being, with the entrepreneurs, we're kind of being their in-house industrial design, or
right,
because they don't have in-house design. Right. But with the other companies, with larger companies, we're acting as an extension to their in-house team. So overflow or particularly weird, hairy projects that they want to see happen, but are gumming up their works because they don't fit into their normal process.
Yeah, the workflow just isn't right.
Yeah, they're like, this is just slowing us down because it's not how we normally operate. Can you help us figure this out?
Right. And so that's where that creative problem solving comes into play. So would you consider yourselves like hired guns? Like you're that's what I think of myself as a developer. Like I'm a hired gun that is paid really just to clean up this one part of town. That's all I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Coming in and shooting up the town, and then I'm leaving. And I think that's a really interesting way of working, where you have some clout in terms of decision-making authority, and then you have some oversight from whoever's giving you direction. But at the end, you have this product that you're like going to you're basically pitching it back to them and saying, do you like this? Is this what you were looking for? Right. And I think that's really interesting in terms of the design, product design and development. So let's talk about that term, product design and development. What does it mean? What's the process like? How is it different than the actual game design of the mechanisms and things like that? So just for full transparency, Katie and Jeremiah and I are working together on something where I'm doing the development of the game stuff, but then Katie and Jeremiah and their team at Creative Fold is taking that and making it like the physical reality of what's it going to look like when it's in a box on the shelf. And what are you going through as you're doing that? What's the process like?
Well, a lot of times, some of the biggest things we're considering is cost. As we said, it just keeps coming up because especially with mass, that's one of the biggest things to consider. Playtesting, I think, is another big one, which in a lot of times we'll work together collaboratively, either with other consultants like we're working with you, or with their in-house team. I think in some ways that's a difference from our team to a lot of other companies. We tend to work really collaboratively with the companies we work with. So we'll have like a weekly meeting or every other week meeting where we're showing them what we've done so far and brainstorming together about what the next steps are and kind of giving them our opinion and feedback. And so we do a lot of that. And I think the cost is a big thing for mass, because what you start with a prototype doesn't always make sense for mass. Like you could have way too many components and you don't actually need that many.
So let's talk about that. From a design perspective, what are some things that, like, just in general, you've seen in games, like, the whatever games you've worked on or seen, and you're thinking to yourself, why do all designers do that? It costs so much to do it. Why are they doing this? what are some of these things that we should watch out for and consider when we're handing a project over? We could do some of that work already if we just knew what it was. What is it?
That's a good question. Does anything immediately come to your mind, Jeremiah?
We could just go through some of the ones we've encountered.
Sure.
I don't know if there's such a variety. It's not immediately striking me as something that happens over and over, but we had one project where there were some figurines that came to us, and they weren't really mass producible, at least not in injection molding. So you could 3D print it, and it can be 3D printed from the ground up. But when you have a mold that has to come together and pull apart in two halves, if you have little undercuts and little cavities, it can't pull back apart once the plastic is in there. So there's complexities to that. You can add complexity and make the mold work, but the more complex it is, the higher the cost. So we had a big challenge there. Anything else you can think of, Katie?
I guess I'm thinking a lot of times there are more components. And when I say components, I mean the cards, the tokens, the tiles, the dice, anything, any component of the game. There are more of them than are strictly necessary, or at least in your head as the designer, you feel like they're necessary. But if there's a way that you can try to think about a variety of options when especially if you're pitching to a company who might license it, that they're to try to present different options for, well, if you really need to cut cost, here's how you might do it without these pieces. So for example, maybe instead of including a pad of paper and a pencil, you ask people to provide their own, which sometimes you can afford to include that, but sometimes you can't. So those are places like that you're looking for options to cut cost. Or instead of having a dice, if you have a deck of cards, maybe you can, depending on what the purpose of the dice is, you might be able to put in 4 extra cards that serve, or 6 extra cards that serve the purpose and as the randomizer for that. So there might be ways that you can achieve the same purpose with a cheaper solution.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Another one is sourcing a component that exists instead of designing one from the ground up.
That's
so there have been many times where someone comes to us and they have something that they have drawn up, but there's another product that can do that. So one was a timer, and we worked with our manufacturing partners to source a timer that they only had to make slight modifications to, rather than creating all new molds and spending tens of thousands of dollars to make an all new timer for this game.
Yeah, here's a story for the game designers out there who know of my game Junk Art. So when Junk Art came out, the manufacturer said, "Oh, you're making a wooden pieces stacking game. We have all the source for like hundreds of thousands of this particular one wooden piece. Do you want to include it?" And we're like, "Sure, why not?" They're like, "Yeah, it's only like 2 cents a piece instead of like 20 cents a piece that it would have cut custom for like a custom piece."
Which makes
the reason why is because that piece already existed at a toy shop, a toy manufacturer down the road. Because in China, all the factories are very close to each other, and they talk to each other all the time. But what do you have? Well, I have these wooden dowels. What do you have? I have these wooden wheels. If you put those wheels on this dowel, now we have an axle for a car, or whatever. And so that was totally a thing. We have a question from Ben Osteen. Ben Osteen asks, what is usually the priority component to fix for the cost? So we've gone over a couple, but is there one item
priority
that you think, that really changes that cost perspective? I'm going to make a guess.
Go ahead. I'm not sure if I think of immediately a specific component. I mean, packaging can make a big difference for sure.
That was it. It.
We're on the same page.
So boxes, for those of you who've never seen manufacturing like P&L sheets, boxes are stupidly expensive.
Yeah.
And then when you get into like really manufactured boxes with like windows and things in them, now you're talking like that box itself
Like
might
the
be
less custom you go on
yeah,
the package, the better.
yeah. But if you go really custom, that custom box might be as much in manufacturing cost as the thing inside of it.
For
Right?
sure.
Yeah, because some of them can get really expensive. I had this question the other day. Somebody asked me, and I didn't know the answer, but you actually might know. Is it more expensive to get a cardboard box made or to put something in a, like a tin Altoids type thing?
I've looked into that before. It's more expensive to do the tin.
That's
Okay.
what I would think the tin.
Yeah.
And especially those what we call the setup boxes, which are like a bottom part and a top part, and they slide into each
Yeah.
other.
Telescoping box.
Exactly. They have machines that can make those automated.
Yeah.
So as long as it's just a simple shape and you can make the walls thinner or thicker, but if it's just that simple shape of a box, a rectangle of some sort that is telescoping, as long as you don't try to do anything fancy with that, that can be mechanized and is a lot cheaper.
Yeah. Basically, Ben, they're saying don't get too cute.
Yeah.
Don't get too cute with it.
And especially try not to have the packaging be involved in the function of the game, where you have to have something that is very custom in order for the game to work.
So that's an interesting thing because a game that we have forthcoming through Off the Page Games is something where the box is needed for the game.
Yeah.
And so that will be an interesting thing. And we so I think in boutique hobby gaming,
You
that's
can get
kind
away
of
with it
you
more.
can get
Yeah.
away with it in a little bit. And like I was talking
Price
today,
points tend to be
yeah,
higher.
and I said,
Yeah.
if we need to replace boxes, that's going to cost a whole lot.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
normally, shipping shipping a empty box is literally the same cost as shipping it if it has
You're
stuff in it.
shipping air.
You're
Yeah.
shipping air for roughly the same cost. It might be just a little bit less but usually, I mean, they usually go on, does it weigh more or volumetrically is it more?
Unless you can figure out how to flat pack it. But if you're talking about a setup box where you can't
Yeah.
fold
Well,
it
we're
flat
usually
somehow.
talking about replacement boxes for boxes that have been damaged in transit and the customer wants a new box. But
Mhm.
and usually a lot of companies will say, sorry, we don't replace boxes. But in this case, with the game that we're thinking about right now, it's like if that box isn't there, they can't play the game because the box is integral to the game being played.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that sometimes like you said, you can get away with that more in hobby gaming because the price
Yeah.
points are higher and the expectation of the kind of quality that gamers
And the
are looking
weirdness
for.
and like everything has
Yeah,
to be so
like people
unique.
love
Blah,
that.
blah, blah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if you're talking about mass, you don't tend to want to get into that as much.
Yeah.
I'd like
that
to say
packaging is really-
also, in addition to the box, we've worked a lot with the inserts that go into it and how to
Right.
make those inserts the best balance between cost and whatever other considerations we're taking
The
in.
presentation when you
Have
open
you
it.
have you seen some of the more modern inserts like that are made by like Game Trays? A company called Game Trays, where it's like everything's
Oh.
like it's vacuum formed stuff. So it's very similar. It is the same technology that was used on those other ones. But like things like you press in the corner and all the tiles like flip up and it's got
Ooh.
locking lids and all these tiles and things. They're just super, super impressive. And before I saw them, I too was like, why do people pay for extra storage? I just use baggies and I'm okay with that. But then I saw these and it's like, oh, I get it. They actually help you store, they help you set up, they help you
Yeah. I think a
clear
good
down.
design of the tray is important. It makes
I think
it
so too.
when you first of all, when you open the box, you get a nice presentation. And if it's designed well so that it's easy to put the tokens away or whatever the pieces are, it's not a headache. So then the next time you think about playing it, you're not thinking about, oh man, that was such a pain to pack up.
Right. It's not a negative experience that'll
You
stop
don't want people to have that association. Yeah.
So here, and that's exactly what's at the bottom of the screen, the word user experience. And throughout our conversations before leading up to this whole show, Katie and Jeremiah and I were talking about what we wanted to talk about tonight. And today's thing was cost versus user experience. That's at least one of the things we wanted to talk about. And really, what you just explained is that sometimes the cost is worth it because it improves the user experience. And so is that what a lot of what your work is like doing some analysis of like this costs this much and it only adds like this little bit to the user experience? I would chop that if we have to chop something, that's number one on the list. Is that what a lot of your like feedback
I think
is?
it's like the vast majority of what we do.
Something that helps a lot with that is the playtesting, so that we're using our experience.
Yes, because you are now a user,
right? With product design and manufacturing and sourcing, we're using all that experience, but we're also pulling in different opinions. So we have a database of playtesters that we send out to across the US, and we can filter by age and different demographics and send them out to those playtesters and get a big, massive amount of information in.
Oh, that's neat. Do you have like somebody who manages the playtesting, or is that just another job that you guys are doing?
We do it. Yeah, we do it in-house. Our project managers do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, project managers. That makes sense. So that's really cool. Because the idea of user experience guiding the process is so important, right? We want to get that feedback from our users to tell us that this is the way we should go. And
sometimes,
I find that in hobby,
sometimes the cost is worth it, you know.
Yeah. Well, when you're talking about the numbers of units being sold in the hundreds of thousands and even the millions of copies, then yeah, it is definitely worth it to invest that much. I think the problem that we have in hobby is the smaller volumes don't allow us to maybe, engage a company like you, because the margins are so slim and the number of sales are so like infinitesimally less, like by orders of magnitude less than like a Hasbro or a Mattel. Now, that's not every game. Obviously, like games like Wingspan or Settlers of Catan have sold like hundreds of thousands of copies and continue to, with or without any additional product design, right? But I wonder how some games could have done better with having your eyes on them. So when we're talking about cost versus user experience, what are some of the things that you have told companies to change that would either improve the user experience to a level that meets the cost, or reduce the cost so it meets the user experience, or somewhat of both? Is there anything that that is coming to mind that you go, oh yeah, there's a real easy one where we, said, hey, what if you just took 5 cubes out of that Jenga tower? It'd be so much better.
I'm trying to think back on some examples. We worked with a game that got kickstarted, and the initial version of the game that was kickstarted was much larger than what ended up being in mass. And one of the things that we worked with them on was figuring out how to reduce the number of components and the size of the box. So it started out, yay big, and then got yay big by the time we put it into mass production. For a lot of that reason, there's a lot less air. You have to balance that when you're also talking about something that's going to sit on the retail shelf, because it has to also still have enough perceived value, that you haven't made it so small that now you have a $50 game that looks like it should be $12.
There's such a weirdness about perceived value, right? That it's got to look like a $50 game, and then it's got to and then when some games like blow that sort of value proposition out of the water, like Gloomhaven. If you know Gloomhaven, it weighs 22 pounds. The game weighs.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was actually going to be the next thing I was going to say, is the weight. If it's a retail product, so much is moving into Amazon and online sales that sometimes that ends up not mattering as much.
Right.
But at retail, and even still, when you receive something that you purchased online for, say, $30 or $50, the weight also has to match. So we had a product that we were working on one time that the sales team wanted us to increase the size of the box so that it would have a larger retail presence. And we just really didn't want them to do that, because if you're not adding any additional components, the weight to the face of the size of the box ratio felt wrong. So when you would pick up the box, it felt empty, and you felt like
a bag of chips.
Yeah, like it was missing something. And it's bad enough in a bag of chips. If it's a board game and you get it and you lift it and it feels empty, it's not a good experience. It's not a good user experience from just the perception of feeling like you got what you paid for.
Right. That perceived value game. We have a question from Dave Killing. David Killing asks, how much does safety testing become a factor that influences the game's design? Does it? Has it ever? And do you guys do safety testing, or is that like some other thing, or you think about it at least?
Definitely, we think about it. What were you going to say, Jeremiah?
I was going to say we coordinate that, and we give recommendations for the safety testing, and then we know how to work with partners to get that information to the clients that we work with.
Yeah, it's not like we do it ourselves.
Yeah, we ourselves aren't safety testers, but we have the connections to be able to work through those things.
Right, or the
But I would
knowledge
say it's
that's got to change.
Yeah, because we work in toy and game a lot, there are certain things that you know to look out for. So
magnets
in your magnets, for example, are a good one.
Don't get Katie on magnets.
Don't get me started on magnets.
I didn't even know that was a watchword for you. It's just a watchword for me.
No, this will be. I feel like you should talk about this, Katie. It's really interesting.
But tell us about magnets, Katie.
I just think that magnets are a danger that a lot of people aren't aware of. So if you have like a knife on a counter, a parent knows that a knife is dangerous. So they wouldn't allow a 3-year-old to be around a sharp knife. But magnets are not perceived as being as dangerous as they actually are. If you swallow 2 magnets, you can die, or you can cause lifelong damage. So it's something that, as a toy designer, now you actually can't have what they call like rare earth magnets, or the high powered magnets in a part. Exactly, in a part that's small enough to be swallowed because of that. Yeah. But I think a lot of parents aren't aware that they can be so dangerous. So that's why I get on a soapbox about magnets.
No, it's true, and that's actually my soapbox as well. It's like, so if you don't know why they're dangerous, it's because when they're swallowed, they can bind parts of your intestine, because they're strong enough to, in a child, anyways, to basically shut down parts of your digestive system, because they can close it all up, because they're magnets and they're strong and they connect to each other, and that just is bad. Your plumbing isn't working.
It'd be really dangerous. Yeah.
Like deathly dangerous. So much so that in Canada, so if you know like Mega Bloks, the company up in Canada that does kind of like a Lego-y thing, they had some magnetized products that were basically, they had to take them all off the market because of that.
Yeah. So if you do have a magnet, it has to be very, very secure. It can't come out of the product, and it can't be in a small part.
Right.
But just also small parts in general. So to David's question about how much does it influence what you're designing, if you're designing something for kids under 6, say, you would be looking at the parts and making sure that the part isn't small enough to be swallowed. So one that we can talk about that isn't under NDA because it's been released now is a game for Think Fun called let's see, what did they end up calling it? Math Dice, My First Math Dice. Right. And the tokens, because of the age that it's for really young kids who are learning the very basics of math, like number sense of just counting and adding 2 numbers together. The tokens had to be larger than a choke tube. So in the toy industry, there is a choke tube, and I think it's any kid product that's under a certain age can't fit inside of the choke. Can't fit in the choke tube. So we had to make sure that those tokens were large enough that they would be safe, that a kid couldn't swallow them.
Yeah, and that they won't wear down over time to become small enough. All these things, they're very important considerations.
Yeah. And that was a tricky thing with that product, especially because in order to make the tokens large enough to be safe, you create a large component, and we wanted to have a lot of little tokens that you could count, which creates a lot of volume, which is a lot of plastic,
box, which makes it
is expensive.
Exactly.
So we had
the product is not for kids.
Yeah, so we had to work on the tokens to core out some of the plastic, to make them so that you can make it big enough, but then it had like ridges so they can lock into each other. But part of that was to also make the tokens not have as much volume, so that there wouldn't be as much plastic used.
Right. Wow. So that's where all of that industrial design know-how and making that all in CAD comes in handy, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There you go. So lots of stuff that goes into the design of the product end of things. And a lot of people who watch this show are really just the design of the rules end of thing. So that's why I brought you guys on, because I thought this is fascinating. Like, how do you take the rules that I give you and make it into a product that ends up on shelves that aren't just like, we're just thinking about stuff and we just, throw some source dice and some source, tokens in there, or a lot of people, it's just a punch sheet of tokens. But in your line of work, you're dealing with like much more big tactile physical pieces that have to be actually designed purposefully, right? And I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that, well, maybe they do because they're designers, but some people out there in the real world may not, because they're not designers, understand that design is intentional. Right? We design with intent all the time. There's a reason, there's a method behind the madness of what this ends up looking like. Like why are the tokens in my first math dice these pretty big clunky things that interlock? Well, now we know. So we
and then with playtesting that was involved in it with kids, where we tried an early 3D printed prototype with kids that didn't stack, and the kids wanted to. We found that the kids wanted to stack it off the post. So there's a little post that they go onto, but they wanted to stack it off the post, and they kept falling off of each other, and it was frustrating. So
they were kind of roundish.
Yeah, and they would slide off of each other. So we added the locking feature so they would stack.
And it saved you some plastic in the run of it. That's great. Matt Paquette, a great graphic designer in his own right, asks, are there any nopes for components in a game that automatically raise a red flag for you? Knives and magnets. Come on, Matt, what are you watching?
Knives. Definitely knives.
I'm gonna get Katie. I'm gonna get your shirt that just has a magnet on it with like a big Ghostbuster sign on it. Does anybody know the real term for the Ghostbuster sign? Like they're just a circle with a red in it. It's like an interdiction sign or something. I think, I can't remember.
I don't know.
But I always just call it the Ghostbuster sign because whenever I call it the other thing, everybody goes, "What do you mean?" The Ghostbuster thing. Oh, the circle with the line through it. Yes, that thing. I think it's called an interdiction symbol. But anyway,
good to know.
Yeah, you can be a nerd.
It's a good question. I'm trying to think of anything that comes to mind.
Just screams like
that I shudder when we get a client that has it.
Magnets.
Yeah, I do shudder when we get magnets. One thing I think of is when you have a product that it's hard to tell what it is or what it does easily on a package. So if it's very hard to communicate what the feature is or what's special about it, that can be tricky. So if you have something that when you show it visually, it just looks like, say, a box, but it actually does something. Yes. And then you're trying to explain what it does, and it's hard to without having a paragraph of text.
That is a great
problematic
example. Yeah. So my rule of thumb, or whatever you want to call it, heuristic. I really don't like the saying rule of thumb, but my heuristic for that is like if it takes longer for me to explain it than it does for me to like actually play the game, then why is it in the game? Like that is definitely a red flag for me. But also like I can't remember which game it was that we were playing, but I could tell how to play the game just by looking at the pieces and the board. It's like, oh, obviously this goes here and that goes here and these go here. And you roll this many dice because it says so right there. And then the turn passes to you and you do the same thing. That's the game.
And I especially like it when the theme of the game pays off what you're doing. So when the theme is something that helps to explain what you're doing. So, and that's where theme, like some games don't have a theme and that's fine, but sometimes the theme can help you understand what the rules are or what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah. Ben Osteen is saying that Clip Cuts, which is a game where you cut, they actually included safety scissors in the box, which was probably a big old headache for them.
I bet that was fun.
Yeah, which is kind of neat though, really. So yeah, anything else from you, Jeremiah? Any user experience nopes, like things that you like just like shake your head at, like, why is this
What do you
here?
shudder when it comes through the door?
There's such a variety. Nothing comes to mind that is a common one. I'm trying to, I don't know.
Well, you talked about one before when we get something that's designed by an industrial designer who's more of a computer game designer than an industrial designer, and they don't understand about like undercuts for mass production. That can be a problem, a challenge.
Game components that just can't be mass manufactured. They can be 3D printed, but they can't be mass manufactured. But
I really like that sentiment. Like, you should. So when we were talking with Hirsch Glick from Hero Time manufacturer in China, he went and learned how to use every single machine in his factory.
So helpful.
So that he understood what the process was, so that he knew how to make the colors. He knew what colors could and couldn't be made. He knew what paper could. He knew what type of meeples could and couldn't be cut. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's like, if you, and especially because a lot of people are still designing in the digital realm, right? Where it's like, it's COVID, designing in digital, we're playtesting. We have 7,000 dice because we can. Why not just clone it? Or I have all these miniatures that are very hyper realistic, but you can't actually injection mold those. And to 3D print everything would be astronomically pricey and less quality, unfortunately. But you can get those funky undercuts because you're building them with supports. And that's the other thing. Like, you end up building with all this excess plastic support, which is just waste. And some of those supports, when you cut them away, sure, the things keep shape, but now it's breakable. And if you did it properly as a miniature for a game, not a 3D rendered picture on a computer screen first, and thought about it, you'd actually have designed it with like the sword attached to the chest or something like that. So only the tip of the blade is out here, but it still looks like he's holding a sword. All those things are very tried and true design practices. When you have something you actually have to hold and manipulate and actually injection mold, as opposed to 3D print. So know your tools, I think, is a good thing. Or engage a company like Creative Fold where they know the tools and they can say, that undercut, it's not gonna look good at all, or it can't be done in the way that you're thinking it could be done.
One of the things that comes to mind is when you're prototyping a game, thinking about the component, how much of your how much handwork is involved in building something. So if you're making a spiral bound thing that has to have some extra tabs on it, and maybe it has like a cardboard thing that goes over it and has a window, and to make that, it takes you 4 hours. That's going to be very expensive to manufacture.
Right. Even if something's automated and capable of doing it, it's got to be programmed, and all those pieces have to be lined up specifically and in the right order, and then collated back in. So that can.
And you'd be surprised how much isn't automated, especially in the toy and game industry, because our quantities aren't big enough to build custom machinery for things, generally speaking. So it's not, unless you're really, really mass, like Target, or and even then sometimes not, when that you can't afford to you have to be on like Rubik's Cube level to be building custom machinery to actually manufacture your product. So a lot of times you'd be surprised how much is actually done by hand in China, even though it's assembly line, but it's still done by hand.
Or definitely parts are done by hand, or the final fabric, the final, like, what's the word, like putting everything together.
Assembly.
Assembly. There you go. The final assembly of it is done by hand. Where like things might be die cut, but then people are popping out the window and attaching that to the front of a spiral bound book, and then spiraling bounding it all together or whatever with like a machine. So instead of doing it all by hand,
is something that's more in the toy side of things than the game side of things. But plush is almost all done by hand.
Is it really?
Just something you don't imagine. The
no,
like embroidered eyes or something might be done by machine, where you'll have a machine that has a bank of little embroiderers, and it will maybe do 20 at a time, and they're all going, and that's just programmed, and that part maybe is mechanized. But the actual putting together like a stuffed animal of some sort is, one person is making arms and one person is making faces and, or putting an ear on or something, but it's all by hand.
It's not like Build-A-Bear.
Yeah, on a bigger level.
True. Another question from Matt. What's the most common battle you have with game designers? When do you get to the fighting words?
We actually, I think, when we get into instructions,
Yeah.
that gets tricky a lot of times. So we a lot of times spend quite a bit of time tweaking instructions, or advising on instructions.
Advising on how to write it in a way that people will understand.
And I think that's very fair that you should, because the original writer knows what the intention is and therefore interprets everything through that lens, right? And you don't, because you've never played this game before. It didn't spring from your head. So it's like, I'm playing this game and I don't know what you mean by this. It's kind of funny. We just got some writing back from a newspaper about, we were just talking about other games. Like they asked us to recommend 10 games for like rainy days in the summer. I said, oh, okay, here's 10, and we explained them. And like all of them had questions like, does this mean this or this? Like, oh yeah, you don't know the game. Okay, let me write it a little bit better, just a little clearer. And it's really funny that these things become battles. As a person who writes an awful lot, like I write like hours a day, I'm just used to getting edited, I guess.
Yeah.
I want an editor. I don't want to self-edit. I think self-editing is like the worst thing possible, because I know my own failings. Like I am not always going to be super clear, and I write better like the second time around, and I write better if somebody makes me write better.
I think anytime
anybody does
write a first draft, even if you're a good writer, it's good to have a second set of eyes.
Yeah.
Because someone just isn't in your head and might think of it a different way than you.
And so you provide that service as well. So not only the playtesting, but you're doing like revisions on rules as well as the product design, because the rules are part of the product and how the product gets seen and interacted with and the experience of the user, right? So you're really kind of looking at the whole package as what is the user's experience, all the way from they see it on the shelf or they see it in an ad to when they take it home and open it, to when they play it, to when they pack it back up.
Yep.
Like the whole lifespan of this game you're considering.
Yeah.
Are you considering end of life?
A little bit. I think it would be nice if we could consider that more. A lot of times cost becomes a factor. I'd love if we could get away from using as much, single-use plastic in packaging, for example. But sometimes that's just the way our...
Yeah, you want a clear window showing the cool thing on the inside?
Yeah.
Plastic.
Yeah.
Sometimes the cost and the environmental friendly factor go together. So sometimes that means using less material, which means reducing the cost, or we'll be bringing down the size of a box, like we were talking about, using less components. The box size comes down,
which is better for shipping.
Get more of them in a container shipping, and now you're spending less money the whole way through and less waste.
It's interesting, like the way that we change public perception of things like, that box isn't big enough for a $50 game, is by making boxes smaller, like all of them.
I agree. I think if we can try and everybody slowly shrink their boxes, and we'll just adjust consumers to something different.
Do it by like 2% every time you print a new box. They'll never notice.
We'll all do it together. And
then eventually, what will happen is like IKEA will have to make their Calyx shelves smaller too. Because they perfectly fit those boxes. Excellent. All right. Well, you know what? We've had a great discussion, and we've talked about so many different things that I hope people out there realize that there's more to designing a game that eventually gets on the shelves than just like making a set of rules and prototyping a game and then even getting it to a publisher. There's more past that, depending on where it needs to go. So for games that are looking at making like a huge impact in the mass market, they're going to go to a company like the Creative Fold that can make it into a full product. And I think a lot of designers out there Like, you need to start thinking about the final product as a whole thing, not just the game, but the whole product. What is it going to look like? What does it look like on the shelf? What does it look like on the table? All these things are really important things to have a vision of. You might not know all the terms. You might not know how to use CAD. You just hire Jeremiah. He'll do that. But my point is that these are, if you want to be a professional in this industry, this is the type of thinking you need to at least start putting in your head. Like, there's more to the game than just the game itself. And I think a lot of designers are very head down and just very micro focused on, but my rule set is perfect. And they don't really think about the rest of it. And maybe they don't need to all the time, but they probably should. Why? To provide guidance. And, if they sign up with a smaller publisher that still wants to do some good product design, they can at least lead them in the right direction, or, suggest, hey, maybe you want to engage the creative fold for a little bit. Now, obviously, in hobby, with the margins being as slim as they are, that's maybe not feasible. But I think there's a lot to learn just by even listening to experienced product designers like yourselves talk about products in our industry that you've had your hand in that changed because. And so I really advise all the people who are listening and watching later on the on-demands, go check out the creativefold.com. Look at some of the game-related product, what are they called? Examples? Case studies? That's a better word?
Case studies.
Yeah, and see how it's laid out. It's laid out very nicely. Like, this is what came in. This is preliminary. Here's what we suggested. Here's what we changed. This is the end result. And it's a really good layout of, like, this is what happens during the process from start to finish. And it's lovely to read and see. And it really makes you think about, there is a lot of work that goes into making something into a product, which is great for just making a game.
I really recommend for people who are just doing it on their own and aren't working with somebody like a team like ours. If you do as close of a prototype as you can make on your own to what would be the real thing, including the instructions, and write them as well as you are able, and put it in the hands of play testers, some friends, family, whoever, but don't tell them how to play. Just watch them play it and see the places where they get confused and the times where they can't figure out how the pieces work, or they are, thinking that they're doing something wrong, but maybe it's actually not user error. Maybe it's actual, like, the design of the way that the token is designed, or the way that the card is designed, or something. So really watch what's happening in the playtest, and you can learn a lot without, explaining too much to tell them how to do it.
Yeah, you'll find out so much by watching and listening to people. Oftentimes you just, like, video record it and we're not even in the room with them. So if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you, Katie and Jeremiah?
Thecreativefold.com, and my email is katie@thecreativefold.com.
And mine's Jeremiah@thecreativefold.com.
There you go. So they can never hire another Katie or Jeremiah, apparently.
Nope.
Yeah, good luck finding another Jeremiah.
And if you want to reach me, you can find me on Twitter @SenFengLim. Erica is @EricaBuyuris. And Alara is @TTVoid. If you want to talk to us about maple syrup, you can reach us @MapleSyrup on Twitter. And for those of you who feel like lending a little bit of support, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/MapleSyrup, where you can help keep the lights on. All it's really doing is paying for software like BLive software that we use to do this show, Canva that we use to make all our assets and all that kind of stuff. And then, we're planning July. In July, Breakout Con will happen in Toronto, the 15th, 16th, 17th, I believe. Erica, Alara, and I will be there. Pretty sure 100% all of us are going to be there. And we will be putting the money to good use, not paying our way or anything. I mean, we're going to figure out how to use it to give back to the community. We just got to put our minds to the grindstone, our nose to the grindstone, I guess, whatever mixed metaphor I'm talking about, and get that done. All right. So can I get, Jeremiah, I'm going to blindside you with this one. I never told you this, but Katie knows. I need a piece of final advice from both of you, one from you and one from Katie. So because Katie knew this was coming.
Yeah, I kind of gave you mine a little bit already.
Yeah. Let's get one more piece of advice then from you, Katie.
Just say it again, Katie, so I have a little bit of time.
Okay. Well, like I said, I think the most important thing is playtesting, and especially when you do your playtesting, to give it the out of the box experience is what I call it. So you're handing it off to somebody and then just watching them open it, read the instructions, and play with all the parts, and don't give them any guidance, and see where they get hung up. And I think that's one of the biggest things that you can do.
And I like how you're phrasing it in terms of, so we often talk about the blind testing or the independent testing like that. But I think the thing that you've added to it is like, get it as close to the final product as you
As
can.
close as you can, yeah.
And then see what it's like to just open it and unpack it and play and then put it back in, which is the whole user experience. It's not just the game. It's not just the rules. It's the use
How does it feel?
Yeah. That's really that next level that I think a lot of us don't do.
Yeah.
And Jeremiah.
So my advice here is know your audience, because a lot of times when something is designed, especially as an entrepreneur, you might think, well, I want this to be for everybody. I want it to be for the world, but it's going to fall into a particular audience and resonate with one group more than another. So it always helps to narrow down, focus on who your audience is, and then that helps to inform all the rest of the user experience
Choices.
design that goes through all the choices.
decisions.
So if you come to us knowing this is my audience, this is who I'm most likely to resonate with, my platform is most likely to resonate with, it can go so far in us making the best decisions.
That helps you make your decisions too, right? Because now you know who the key demographic is, right?
Yeah, and
Very
we
cool.
have tools for helping to figure that out, but yeah, the more you already know how to do that, is the more we can help.
Excellent. So let's just take a look at what is coming up, everybody. So, boom. Oh, we have next week Ayako Teranashi from Big Cat Games. Ayako will be coming to talk about importing indie games from Japan to North America. Very cool. On June 8th, John Simon is coming in to talk about PDF accessibility. How do we make our PDFs for full RPGs or for rules more accessible to people with vision impairments, physical impairments, etc., etc. On June 15th, the Flat Out Studio people are coming. Molly Johnson, Robert Melvin, Sean Stankovich. They're coming in. And congratulations to Flat Out and to AEG for Cascadia getting a nomination for Spiel des Jahres. On June 22nd, we have a host panel coming up. We don't know what it's going to be about, but we'll ask you, our loyal viewers, to help us pick a topic. And the last show of this season on June 29th, Molly Zeff from Flying Leap Games is coming in to talk about, did I say Flying Leap Games? Is coming in to talk about party games and how to make them. All right, and then it's summer break, and we will see you in September. So everybody, we will see you soon. Thanks very much to
Thanks
Katie
so much.
and Jeremiah for coming. It was great having you.